Since at least the early 2000s, HBO has changed the game of what it means to be a prestige television series, from The Sopranos and Sex and the City to Girls and True Blood to Hacks and Succession. What was once a means to get Hollywood films onto home TV screens has now become the go-to destination for award-winning original programming, with viewership in the tens of millions. They weren't kidding back in the 80s when they said it's not television, it's HBO. So now the great pop culture debate wants to decide, what is the best HBO original series? Attention all True Blood vamps, I'm a fairy, and you're welcome to suck me. I'm your host, Eric Rezsnyak. Please welcome my panel for this episode. The guy he's dating has the funkiest tasting spunk. Please welcome back Bob Erlenback.
Eric, I was once told I wouldn't be able to get backstage to see Mick Jagger. Well, I did get backstage, and I blew him.
Waiter, I'd like to cancel my rice pudding. The last thing she remembers is stopping by a diner and hearing Don't Stop Believin' on the radio. It's Karissa Kloss.
Hi, life's a journey, and I'm happy to be here.
Bada bing. And he's always got a pants tent for you. It's Kevin Dillon.
Is it a pants tent or a boner? I assume it's a boner.
The camera just faded to black, and it says, directed by Robert B. Reed. So before we get to the debate, how does this work? We made a list of 100 plus HBO series. Note that we stuck to the shows that ran for more than one series or which were intended to be ongoing series, so no limited series like Band of Brothers, Mildred Pierce, etc. We got more than 120 people who took the poll, tallied their votes, ranked the picks by popularity, and added them to a bracket. Now we argue about it and insult each other, all for your amusement. Want to play along at home? You can. Head to greatpopculturedebate.com and go to polls and brackets. There you'll find the downloadable listener brackets for this in every episode of our little show. Do your picks match up with ours? Do you think we need to book an appointment with Dr. Melfi? Let us know by dropping a comment on this episode at our website or by yelling at us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And lastly, if you're curious about how we went from the top 32 down to the Sweet 16, become a Patreon supporter of our podcast. Our Patreons at the $5 level or higher get exclusive access to the warm-up/part ones for each episode, in which we work our way through all of round one. It's like a whole bonus episode for each topic, and it includes arguments you will not hear anywhere else. And it's only one of our great Patreon perks, so consider supporting us today. And with that out of the way, let's head to the home box office and get straight to the debates. First up, 3/4 of the panel wanted the dynastic drama and dragons of ultimate number one seed Game of Thrones to conquer round two, but Kevin wanted to advance hitman turned actor Barry, a 5 seed. Kevin, why are you following the Assassin's Creed? Bob, explain why when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. I'm going to have Kevin go first.
I know I'm going to lose this, and that's okay. I like Game of Thrones. I don't get the obsession with it. I think it is a fine dramatic series. I think it's overhyped. I liked the finale even too. I just do not understand it. But for me, Barry is a show that it's just really, really genius. You know, you take this concept of a hitman who wants to be an actor, and that just, I don't know, that alone is an HBO series in and of itself. And then you have the talent of Bill Hader, you have Henry Winkler as his acting coach, you have Stephen Root as his former hitman boss, I guess, if you will, or the person who would hire him to put hits out on people. And you get to explore this like weird little world of what it means to try and become a successful actor in LA, while also what it means to kind of explore male anger and rage, because that's what you're exploring through Bill Hader's character as a former vet. And I think there's something just so brilliant and unique about Barry that I guess I rarely see in shows around that have this like male-led comedic voice, although Barry is very, very, very dark in its humor. And then there's the episode Ronnie Lily, where they're essentially trying to outrun the young little girl whose father was killed by them, and it's just this bananas premise, but grounded in trying to find humanity in its lead. I love Bill Hader. I think he is, I will say this, the most talented actual genuine actor to come out of SNL and all of its history. Like, I think he is the best actor of all of it, throughout the whole history of SNL. Maybe Bill Murray, I could go that route, but like, man alive, Bill Hader is fantastic. The show is brilliant. It has a artistic point of view, it is just genius. And I am comfortable losing this battle because it is a uphill one, but I also wanted us to talk about Barry. It's coming back this year. And to be honest with you, it is probably one of my, if not my most anticipated show of 2022. So I want to name all that. But again, I'm up against Game of Thrones. So
Dragons, mama. So that's a great argument for Barry, and I love how passionate you are about the show. It's a luck of the draw, right? Barry's an 8 seed, or not an 8 seed, excuse me. It's a what did we say it was?
5 seed.
5 seed. And that's why it sailed through round 1. Like it was a unanimous decision in round 1. It's up against the ultimate number 1 seed. Before I have Bob shoot his load, that's a terrible thing. Shoot his balestra. Let me ask, Karissa and Bob, did Kevin's argument sway you to vote for Barry instead of Game of Thrones?
I am a huge Barry fan too, and I'm excited to know that it's coming back this year. But I can't vote against Game of Thrones just because, as far as rubric goes, and how I'm grading these, Game of Thrones has completed and it has several seasons. We don't yet know. Barry might end up sucking. I highly doubt it will, but and so with that being still in question, I have to go with Game of Thrones, but I love Barry so much. And I think it took for me, it kind of is like Succession. It took a little bit to find the right note of the humor for me. Like it just takes me a minute to calibrate to what they kind of are trying to do. And then once it hits constantly, and it's so good. And I've been meaning to go back and rewatch Barry, so I think I'm going to try and do that before season 3 because it sounds like a really fun thing to do. And once you get the humor, it's just like there's that bit about the table in season 2, and like he has to train an entire army to be his replacement so he can leave the job. Like I get this, So yeah,
When does season 3 supposed to start, Kevin?
End of April. It's going to be eligible for this year's Emmys. This year's comedy Emmys are going to be a bloodbath. So get ready because you've got Barry, you've got Atlanta, you've got Maisel, you've got maybe Hacks. You have all these like fantastic shows. So it will be back soon.
Okay.
Yay.
Great. A good excuse to go back and rewatch. Bob, did that argument sway you for Barry over Game of Thrones?
Well, maybe Carissa's argument that Barry might suck. Maybe I should be voting for that. Maybe he does end up sucking. I don't know. But no, it doesn't. I think, everything Game of Thrones brings, and I'll save it for maybe a future round if it's needed. When you want to talk about water cooler, there's your water cooler right there. So
yeah. The most water cooler of shows on this list, for sure. Okay, so we are going to advance Game of Thrones to round 3. The panel unanimously decided to promote the repugnant Roy family in Succession, a 3 seed, leading to the permanent deactivation of Westworld, a 2 seed. I would like to briefly talk about Westworld since we didn't talk about it all in round 1. It was another unanimous victory. I'm going to don my white cap and speak on Westworld is a deeply frustrating experience for me because it has so much potential. And I actually even love season 2, were what HBO was made for, right? Like this is really high concept shit. And there was so much good stuff in seasons 1 and 2. And then 3 just lost me. And they are coming back for 4, and that's apparently the end of it. By the same token, Succession season 3 was not great. And I was just like, they kind of both are similar. I mean, they're very different shows, obviously.
No, Eric.
Did you watch all of season 3 of Succession?
I did watch all of season 3.
Eric.
I watched all of season 3 of Succession, and I did enjoy the last couple of episodes, but that was a lot of circle jerking for at least the first half of that season, where I was like, we have done this before. The only plot line that interested me in season 3 of Succession, and it's continuing on, it's continuing, so we might want to hold this, but was the Kendall having an absolute mental breakdown and not naming it until literally like the last 20 minutes of the season. That was the only part of it that
I'm going to say this. I think Westworld is maybe almost the worst show on this bracket.
Really?
Yes. Worse than True Blood, worse than, I think the worst is The Newsroom, but I would say Westworld is very close to that.
I am going to hardcore disagree with you on there. I will say this. Westworld had, clearly when you're watching season 1, shit went down behind the scenes. And like they filmed a bunch of it, then they had to take an extended hiatus. And then they brought it back, and like there are major characters that are written off very quickly, and then there's new characters that are brought on. You're like, where did this come from? But I thought seasons 1 and 2 were really strong, and even though that time jumping stuff pissed off a lot of people in season 1, where you're just like, oh, where did that come from? A lot of people were like, oh, I see exactly what you're doing here. Season 2 was even more complicated with that. Season 3 just... I think the mistake was moving outside of the park, even though I did want to see what that looked like. But it went so far outside of the park that to me, I was like, this isn't even the same show anymore, in my opinion. But there are great performances in Westworld. I think Tandy, and she took back her original name, which is Tandui, I think. Tandui New kills that show. Evan Rachel Wood, great in that show. I'm not exactly a fan of the Ed Harris experience, which to me at this point is very paint by numbers Ed Harris, but he's really good in that role. Who else am I forgetting?
James Marsden.
Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins is great, but it's the Anthony Hopkins
Jeffrey
wheelhouse, right?
Jeffrey
Wright's incredible in that show.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Duh. James Marsden was fine, but had very little to do. There's a lot of stuff I love about Westworld. I just think the people lost the plot with it. And also, frankly, it is a cursed show. I think the sets have been burned down twice in 2 different natural disasters.
Oh, wow.
And like things keep happening behind the scenes on that show. It is fully cursed. But I think it has all the promise of what an HBO series could be, and there are moments where it harnesses it, and there's a lot of wasted potential. So I'm fine with it going out, but I'm putting out there right now. Succession, I loved seasons 1 and 2. 3 was very shaky for me, and it better come out with guns blazing in season 4. Otherwise, I think it's going to have the exact same experience that Westworld did for me, which is tremendous potential, exactly what HBO comedy should be doing, and just not realizing it in the later seasons. So any other thoughts on Westworld before we continue?
It's bad. No.
Kevin hates it. Thank you, Kevin. Next up, it's 1 seed The Wire against 4 seed True Blood. Kevin, tap into the success of The Wire and move it forward. Bob, crack open a bottle of True Blood and explain that why in this house we recycle. And nobody else is going to get that reference, but it's one of the funniest things I remember from True Blood, where Vampire Bill has become a new father to Jessica and is yelling at her about recycling their blood bottles. It's just so quintessentially True Blood. It's perfect. I'm going to have Kevin go first.
I'm going to plug this. You should become a Patreon and join that so you can listen to part 1, because we started a really good conversation around The Wire. I think for me, the work that David Simon and his writing team and the directors and the cast do around this topic is just really next level for me. Like it is probably for me, the best show, the best dramatic series that HBO has put out there. And we talked a little bit about this in part 1. So you may, again, if you become a Patreon, you can hear this, but there is a denseness that exists in The Wire. And I think it's something that I love because it gives me a window into a world that I don't live in, nor have I experienced, but it feels fully lived in. And I think that's the thing that's really unique about David Simon's series, whether it's Treme or The Plot Against America. When you enter into these worlds, you really get the full picture. And it can take time to get to the place that it's getting to. I do recognize that. But I think what David Simon really does in his work, especially in The Wire, is you get this. Not only people are the characters, but the city itself, and people kind of make fun and tease at that a little bit. And there's even a moment where Noah Hawley is in an interview, a director's roundtable, and he says that Omar is his favorite character in television history, and Ava DuVernay just kind of laughs at him because it's just this like stupid white boy thing to say. And it's fantastic, and I encourage you to find this interview. I think it's a Hollywood Reporter roundtable, and I think that's sometimes the thing that happens with The Wire is like it's just got this like glommed on white critics effect, but that isn't necessarily what it is. It's because the show is just so damn brilliant, and it really is a larger understanding of what is happening in the world of Baltimore, and with the intersections of that community and policing, and how those two things are at odds with each other, and there is no community development or engagement, and how do these two spaces live and don't live together. And I just think it is just such a slice of life, fascinating show. And I think that's something that people often want from, like, per se, a documentary, but where you rarely get scripted shows that really delve into the depths of society in this way. And that's why The Wire is lauded to be one of the best shows of all time. And you get a really authentic lived experience from the Black community in Baltimore that you per se will never see again lived on television or in film, and it is really, really a genius show.
Kevin, one thing that we have not done, and there may be people listening to this who have never watched The Wire, who have no idea what it is, because it's a show that's like 15 years old now. The viewership at the time was not big. So briefly, either you or Karissa, because you guys are the two kind of champions for the show here, very briefly explain, like, what is the show about? Because you wouldn't know it from the name.
Well, I think Kevin hit it. It's the story of Baltimore through the lens of law enforcement and other areas of the city. And so each season kind of focuses on a different part of it. You have the drug trade, which kind of goes through the whole thing. Season 2 is the ports. And then you have like politics, schools, the newspaper. So you kind of get, so this is why it's a slow burn, and also why it's brilliant is how else do you give an audience a full picture of all of the factors that impact society and culture, and how things can change, but why they still stay the same, without giving these, like, it's heavy stuff, and it's really, there are no easy fixes because of how many moving parts there are. And so by spreading it out over this series and showing it in this way, it gives you so much more of a perspective on what it is, urban life in Baltimore, but also just probably, I think a lot of this is probably really transferable to a lot of other more populated areas. And it's just such a richer and deeper understanding of culture in these places.
Thank you.
I would argue that no network would touch a show like this.
No.
HBO is the only network that would tackle this. The only other network maybe, and again, it's more in doc format, is PBS. And like, you're not going to get this hard-hitting, like, depthful, that's the wrong word and not a word, deep exploration of society in this way. And that's why The Wire worked. It's because HBO trusts David Simon to tell really beautifully brilliant, deep stories around layered aspects of society.
Yeah, and it's a long story, and I don't think you can do this without having subscribers pay you to do it. You know, I think you're right. Yeah,
these are great arguments. Bob, I want to hear you talk about True Blood.
No, and I want to admit, it is an excellent examination of like that urban life, how institutions have negative effects on people, like all of those different components of everything that we just said about policing and how these people interact in the community, et cetera. Like all of that's there. I think it's important for all of those things. I think it is interesting that we had to pause to explain it to the listener, because I'm not sure that a broad audience is going to know, and we needed to do that for them. I think True Blood is, we talked about this in part 1, if you want to hear it in part 1. It is a water cooler show. It is something that was, came along and was a lot of fun. It hit with a lot of people and a lot of audiences, and in being able to talk about it, around the water cooler the next day. It was something that, was appointment television for a lot of people. The Wire wasn't that. And The Wire is super important. And I think all of those things are true, and it's incredibly well made and all of that. I just don't know as though it's really the best series, because I don't know as though it's something that is as approachable as something like True Blood, taking in all of the messiness that we talked about in part 1 too, about there are some seasons that are real clunkers there, but it's a lot of fun. It's not as as heavy as The Wire. It's something that's more approachable. It's something that people just had a lot of fun with, and I think that's, to me, puts it ahead of The Wire. The Wire is just really, really hard to watch, especially now, however many years later, 15 years later, where like I tried to binge through some additional seasons of this, and it's so hard to do so.
But I will argue that The Wire was the number 2 vote in our poll, which says something. Like maybe it is, we're maybe talking about it as though it is something that it isn't. And it seems like it's a show that, while it wasn't necessarily popular when it came out, it found its audience, and people found it because it was critically acclaimed in a way. I remember reading an article towards the end. I want to say it was in Entertainment Weekly, which poor one out that isn't getting published anymore.
I know, isn't that crazy?
It makes me so sad, because that was like, that was my newspaper. It
was my Bible for years.
I think Kate Rakulia still has all of hers. Didn't she do collages from them?
Oh my God. I remember and I just remember Entertainment Weekly really talking up that show. And I think it's because people stuck up for it that people found it and became enamored with the story of The Wire. And I'm going to save more, because I have a lot to say when it goes up against Game of Thrones, potentially, eventually, because it is better.
So I'm going to stick with True Blood here, and I think you made great arguments. And
Eric.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because The Wire is still advancing. I mean, Karissa, you're sticking with The Wire.
Yes.
It's a tie vote, so it advances because it's a 1 seed. True Blood's a 4 seed. But I hear all your arguments, and I especially like the argument that only a channel like HBO could do this show, because you have to have a subscriber base to pay for this long-form storytelling to take place. That's really compelling to me as an argument, and we've discussed rubric, and I think one of Bob's arguments, which is so true, is like, is this a show that only HBO could do? I think that's also true for True Blood, but I think Kevin's point, and maybe Carissa's, I don't remember who else said it, but like, really only HBO could do The Wire. But if I'm being true to myself, you said something, Kevin, that I thought was so especially accurate, which is maybe this show would have worked better if it was a documentary as opposed to a drama series. And that's exactly how I feel. Like, I love watching documentary series, but I've tried The Wire, and it is dense to me in a way that is not pleasurable to watch. And in part 1, we were talking about shows that we were upset didn't make the bracket. I brought up Looking, and one of the arguments that Looking didn't connect with the gay community is, I don't want to see all of my flaws held up in a mirror to me on television. That's not why I watch television, especially not at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. These are important stories. They need to be told. I'm all for that. But it was not told in a way that worked for me and that I found pleasurable to watch. So it's one of those things where people are like, oh, you got to watch The Wire, man. I know it's a little bit of a dense thing, but you just got to like get through 70 hours of it, and then it's amazing. And it's like, no, that's not for me, dog. I'm sorry, and you can tell me that I'm an ignorant slut. You'd be right, but I'm sticking with True Blood here, which is a show that I was passionate about. I loved watching. Is it stupid? Is it a mess? Is it a completely inconsequential vampire fuckfest? Yes, and hell yes. And that's why I loved it. So I'm sticking to my guns here, and I will be on the wrong side of history on that. Comfortable with it. The Wire advances regardless. So next up, 2-seed Watchmen is up against 3-seed Last Week Tonight. Could not be more disparate approaches. And I think right now we are largely on the side of Watchmen, but I know Karissa wanted to talk a little bit about Last Week Tonight.
Yeah, I think Last Week Tonight is a newsy show, right? Watchmen gives us some history lessons for sure. Last Week Tonight has been around longer, which is what tips my vote in that direction. I love Last Week Tonight for how it makes news palatable, because the times that we're in, like, it's just so fucking depressing, you know? But somehow John Oliver is able to make me laugh about the absurdities, or I don't know, understanding also he affects real change, right?
Yeah.
They set up alternate website, they buy domains for stuff, they do fundraising. It's all very tongue-in-cheek and with like a humorous aspect, but it's real change. But also, I haven't watched that show in at least a few seasons, and I've noticed what happens is when you get out of the routine of watching it regularly, you can't backtrack. You have to watch it the week or maybe the week after, but otherwise it gets kind of lost. And so that's a negative for me. But Watchmen is brilliant, but it's also just one season. So
great arguments. And I agree. Like Last Week Tonight genuinely affects real change. I have nothing against it. It has done a lot of good in the world, which is crazy considering it's a satirical news show, right? Mm-hmm. He's trading on what Jon Stewart started with The Daily Show. Arguably, he's improved upon it. I do think what hurts the show is it's so seasonal and it's only on for certain chunks of the year. And they don't do a great job, frankly, of letting you know when it's back, if I'm being honest. Like, I'm a fan of the show and I have no idea when it's on and when it's not. But there are many other, most of the late night hosts now have kind of really also adopted this tactic. But I think John Oliver is the best among them. But he has genuinely impacted real change, and we do need it in the world right now. Is it sad? The comedians are the ones who are making very real world issues palatable for us, says the guy who just voted for True Blood over The Wire.
I was gonna say.
At least I have self-awareness. But no, like realistically, it is a good show and an important show. Is it a show that only HBO can do? Nope, because everybody else is also doing it. And I would argue that they do it a little bit better because it's more frequent. And frequency is hugely important to that format. You have to be able to do it quickly, touch on today's issues, then you're out, and tomorrow you have a whole other crusade to launch. And I don't think that Last Week Tonight is allowed to do that because of its format.
And I would argue that we talked a little bit about this in a like intermediate break, but I would argue that we were like, oh, people will vote for kind of align with like what celebrity does or says. And for me, that's a problem. That's how we got someone elected president a few years ago. And like, that is the problem that we lean into when we kind of don't actually explore what issues mean. But with that said, John Oliver does, and he's the one who actually leans into it and like fleshes out his work. He's, I think, one of the few who is doing it well.
Yeah.
And dives into it, because Last Week Tonight is a good show. It's just not Watchmen.
Yeah. So you're with Watchmen on this one, Kevin?
Yep.
And Bob?
I really like Carissa's argument about, Watchmen is only one season. And I took a look at that with a lot of my picks too. But Watchmen could not come back tomorrow ever again. And I would still say that this season of Watchmen was the winner and excellent, right? So yes, Watchmen.
Okay. So we'll be advancing Watchmen next in a battle of sexy comedy versus depressing family drama from HBO's original Golden Age. We are evenly split between 4 seed Sex and the City and 1 seed 6 Feet Under. Karissa, why should we bury our reservations about advancing the Fisher clan and move forward 6 Feet Under? I will say that I'm sorry, I can't. Don't hate me. And try to push Carrie and the Gales to round 3. I'm going to have, Karissa, you just went, so let me take it. So with apologies to Dream On, which was HBO's first quasi-hit sitcom, Sex and the City really was the channel's stake in the ground for comedy shows. It was a success pretty much right out of the gate. And by the time it hit its stride in season 3, it was a full-on juggernaut. Like, this show, literally, in case you were not like aware of pop culture at the time, this is 99 through I think 2006 is when the show ended. Does that sound about right?
Something along those lines. Mm-hmm.
Like, by the time you got to like early 2000s, this show was setting fashion. It was setting trends. Like, if you enjoyed an Appletini in the early 2000s, you can directly thank Carrie Bradshaw for that, because that's what this show was doing. To me, I would argue that Sex and the City culturally had more impact on American society than any other show on this list. And you can say that I'm wrong on that, but like, it was huge. It was huge all the way through, even through that first movie. We won't talk about the second one. I will acknowledge that the show has not aged well. It is notably white, even while set in New York City. And that's a glaring problem that the producers and the cast all acknowledge now and tried to correct when doing the spinoff Just Like That. You could argue that they course corrected too much on that front. But I think and also the later seasons, the women themselves really stopped to behave, Samantha especially, less like actual women and more were like reflections of the gay men that were largely writing them at the time. So there's a lot of criticisms that you can launch against Six Feet Under, Sex and the City. But that being said, you cannot deny that cast is amazing. All 4 of them awesome in those roles. It is very funny, highly rewatchable. It has like so many literally iconic moments that are still culturally relevant to this day. It is a brand, and it is a kind of, it created a lifestyle for people. Like literally, Sex and the City is a tentpole for HBO almost 20 years after it went off the air. They brought back And Just Like That. It is like, I guess you can't really factor that into this because they're just talking about the original, but I don't think it's any surprise that even after almost 20 years off the age, a spinoff comes up and it is still crazy successful for that channel, even with all of the criticism levied against it. Karissa, do you have anything to say about 6 Feet Under?
I have so many things to say about 6 Feet Under. I mean, I kind of can't believe I have to argue this against Sex and the City.
I got your back on this one.
Oh, thank you. 6 Feet Under was 5 seasons, 63 episodes. Alan Ball, the Fisher family funeral home in LA, right? It opens with the death of the patriarch and the kids trying to figure it out. But the kids give you completely different experiences. You have the older brother, you have the gay brother, you have the young teen daughter who's trying to figure out her life, and then you have Frances Conroy as a widow. Like, it's just, every episode opens with a death, and you get this, there's this formula to it that's kind of like Law and Order-ish, right? But it's you get the stories are moving forward constantly. It's kind of a meditation on life and death, and also family drama, and also what it is to be a sibling, what it is to, try and follow in the steps of your parents. It's so many things that Sex and the City is not. And while I understand the pop culture impact of the easy parts of Sex and the City, the fashion, the drinks, like 6 Feet Under makes you confront your mortality, and it's maybe a less comfortable thing to embrace, but I think ultimately is a lot more important.
Yeah, well, you got me there, gal. I'll also say both of these shows have excellent final episodes. They both have
absolutely
really legendarily good finales.
The problem is Sex and the City kept going, and they ruined that. They really did.
6 Feet Under is apparently getting a continuation too. I was just reading about that. So
we will see. I don't know that. I think it's one of those things that they're gonna. Frasier was supposed to also get a continuation. That has not happened yet. So we'll see.
So Bob, I'm guessing you're with me on Sex and the City.
I am, and it's funny because Carissa's sentiments of I can't believe I'm arguing 6 Feet Under against Sex and the City. I am feeling the same way about Sex and the City, and I was looking at the seeds, and I can see that 6 Feet Under ranked higher on the seeds as well. And I just, for some reason, I feel that's wrong somehow. But I'm not gonna debate the voters per se. But Sex and the City, to me, it almost became it is almost defining of the HBO brand at the time. Like HBO is very like intertwined with this property in a way that I think 6 Feet Under wouldn't be the same way. I think that I think to your point of like they brought this series back so many years later, and it is still wildly successful. I think says a lot about.
Continue.
I'm not here debating that right now. I watched it, but I'm going to continue to watch it. I will probably never stop watching it. Even I liked the second movie, and nobody else does, because I like these characters and I like spending time with them. I think. For me, it spun off the Carrie Diaries. Everyone, I don't know if that's a positive, but I loved the Carrie Diaries too. So I don't know. I guess I'm with Sex and the City. So To answer your question with a short answer, yes.
I think the thing with 6 Feet Under, though, is I go back to this thing that I don't think there's another network that would tackle 6 Feet Under either. Like, I think HBO was the home for 6 Feet Under intentionally. Alan Ball, who did True Blood, who you all have been talking up, both of you, as mess and that you like. 6 Feet Under is 20 times the show that True Blood was. And it explores these dramatic elements of life in a really intricate way. You have Rachel Griffiths, who is one of the most complex female characters that has been on an HBO series, honestly. And I think it's really fascinating to watch her throughout the series. My God, the threesome with the paintball instructor, guys. Come on, Jesus Christ.
And then the musical episode.
Yeah, I mean, and the series
and then the
finale.
Drug episode.
The drug episode, the episode where David gets kidnapped.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Oh my God. I mean, talk about euphoria and not being able to breathe.
Yes.
This is that.
Yes.
It was that. Yeah.
And some of the best performances I've seen that just didn't get the credit they deserved. They didn't win a lot of Emmys. They did not. They deserved so much more. And I think it's because it was a little too arm's length at the time. But talk about taking the concept of American Beauty, which Ellen Ball wrote, and actually elevating it and making it quality.
Mm.
Bob, you want to say something?
Yeah. Can I also? This is a silly little throwaway thing, but I saw this, I think, probably in a tweet at some point, and I don't know if this is true for other people, but it's very true for me. When I hear that staticky HBO logo that pops up on the screen, like, for me, there's always something that immediately associates right after that. Like, in my brain, I always hear the theme song to Sex and the City chime in after that. I know that's just a silly little thing, but like, it's just, again, it's so associated with HBO and such a huge impact culturally and for them as a network, and really the stake in the ground with regards to comedy, as you mentioned. Like, that's just another little thing that I go to in my brain. But
I don't think that is silly. I think it actually is important. Like,
Yeah.
It became synonymous with HBO. But here's the thing. And again, we are split here. Seeds would determine it. 6 Feet Under is going to go ahead, because I don't think that either Kevin or Chris are going to change their votes.
No.
So I will just say this. I think with 6 Feet Under, Sex and the City, Sopranos were all on HBO at the same time, correct?
Yes.
Within
yes, they were.
the ballpark
Year
of each other.
wise, yeah, like they weren't airing at the same time, but like year wise, they were all kind of at that same class. That's that golden age of original
6
golden
Feet
age.
Under aired. It started and stopped while The Sopranos was still airing.
Yes,
on both sides of it.
and I think, Kevin, one of the reasons that it didn't win as many awards is because it was up against The Sopranos. And I truly do believe that ultimately 6 Feet Under was the JV squad for HBO drama, whereas Sex and the City was the varsity comedy. That's an argument that I'm going to put out there. Additionally, you mentioned that 6 Feet Under is 20 times the show that True Blood is, both of them being an Alan Ball joint. I think that he went for chaos with True Blood, which is very true to that source material. And 6 Feet Under is meticulous. It is refined. It is subdued. It is extraordinarily well crafted. And you all are right. Listen, I hope it's not coming off that I am anti 6 Feet Under, because I'm not.
Neither
I think
am
it's
I.
a great show, and I'm not at all upset that it's continuing. What I'm baleful over is that Sex and the City, from a comedy perspective, is to me still the number one HBO comedy. You can say no Veep, but in terms of cultural impact, Sex and the City is by and away, far and away, by and large, the most successful HBO comedy.
I think what we're getting to is who has access to HBO and why Sex and the City. Like, there's a lot of layers that we can get into the conversation. Yeah. And it's like, who did HBO cater to in the beginning?
Yeah.
Wealthy white people.
Well-off, middle-aged white people.
Right.
Yeah.
And I get that. And that's not to say that Sex and the City is bad, because I liked Sex and the City. When we preview alert, when we do our 90s episode, I actually have it going farther than I expected it to go, because in the late 90s, it is excellent. Mm-hmm. It is great TV. With that said, this also was a tough one for me, but for me, I went with 6 Feet Under because I'll be honest with you, HBO is running Sex and the City into the ground. I actually don't think the first movie is good, and I think the second movie is atrocious, and I think and just like that, its follow-up is really garbage. Like, I watched it all. I did. It was really bad. And I like the characters, but I don't know that it is continuing a legacy that it should for the show. And I think it's not doing the original its justice. And I know that 6 Feet Under might have a follow-up, but as of right now, 6 Feet Under wins out because of that for me.
Do we also think that there is a slight disadvantage in this pair up as well because it is a comedy over a drama? I don't know.
I think so.
I like comedies more than I like dramas. So in all honesty, like in the next round, Veep's going to beat 6 Feet Under for me. So no, I mean, that's not it for me. Because Sex and the City is also pretty dramatic too.
Spoiler warning, because we're about to get to the Veep matchup. No, I'm just kidding. Fine. And just like that, Sex and the City is out and 6 Feet Under will continue. Next, 3/4 of us wanted to keep the campaign going for 2-seed Veep, but Karissa has a shotgun in her pocket and 6-seed Deadwood on her mind. Bob, why is advancing Veep the correct domestic policy? Karissa, don't shoot the messenger and explain why Deadwood should push forward into the bracket. I'd like for Karissa to go first.
I'm kind of surprised that I'm on my own here because this show is really highly regarded by a lot of people, including one of my favorite critics, Matt Zoller Seitz. It was on from 2004 to 2006. It was 3 seasons, 36 episodes, and on a lot of people's lists of things that were canceled too soon. And so it got to actually have a movie, which came out semi-recently, 10 years after the show, and more than 10 years after, but it was set 10 years later. It's a Western, and it's also really, it's kind of like Rome in a lot of ways. You get actual historical figures like Wild Bill, Calamity Jane, Wyatt Earp, mixed in with random people who are your insight into life in South Dakota as it's changing from a camp to a semi-regulated frontier town to an actually incorporated place, and how people's kind of relation to lawlessness and order changes over time, and I guess capitalism. Here you go. It's a very American story.
A red herring.
What did you say?
I said it was a red herring. Capitalism was just a red herring.
Communism.
I know, I was being funny.
I know, you are funny. I'm sorry.
It's also very, very sweary. One of our characters is Al Swearingen, but the show, I guess, was criticized for the pilot episode. The first hour has 43 fucks in it, and somebody counted the series overall has 2,980 fucks, which average out to 1.56 fucks per minute. So
you can't say they have no fucks to give. I mean,
they gave all of them.
All of them.
They
They're gone.
2,980. So.
You made a point that it's like Rome, and I feel like it had the exact same problem as Rome, which is A, expensive, and B, it's kind of got a niche audience.
No, it's like also, so this is trivia from Wikipedia, but the creator, David Milch, he wanted to do a series to examine how civilization comes together from chaos around like a symbol, and his what he was developing was Roman civilization and the cross, but then Rome was already in development, so HBO was like, can you like reframe this somehow? He was like, okay, let's do a Dakota frontier town around gold. Here we go.
Yep.
And that's how it came about.
Yeah, and I feel like they were fairly close to each other in terms of development, right? Rome was a little bit before, right? Yeah. So I think it was in that weird period where like Sopranos was winding down and they were looking for their next big hit, and there were expectations on viewership, and if they weren't hitting them, they were expensive. It was like The Chop.
Oh no, this was actually a year before. This was 04 to 06 and Rome was 05 to 07.
Really? I guess I assumed Rome was first. Anyway, I'm going to hand it over to Bob for Veep.
You want to talk about sweary? My God, my God. You want to talk about fucks to give? My God. With the exception of, I think, only a little bit of clunkiness at the beginning of a first season, just trying to get the footing a little bit in those first few episodes. I can't remember the last time I watched a series that clicked on all cylinders the way that Veep did from the very beginning. This show like crackled from the very beginning and only got better with every single season. Every single actor is both well cast and amazing in their roles. They knew exactly the character they were playing. They behaved that way. They reacted that way. They played their characters to a T. Like there was not a weak titty on that mama cat at all. How can you deny the brilliance of Julia Louis-Dreyfus in the role of Selena Meyer? 6 Emmy wins for the role. It's gotten such critical acclaim, won several awards, 17 Primetime Emmy awards, I think probably including the 6 for Julia Louis-Dreyfus. But, I can't think of a show that has made me laugh as hard recently as Veep made me laugh. That's only a few years off the air at this point. Sex and the City certainly has some big laughs for me, but this is something that hit so good and so well on the jokes that it was making, the satire it was doing. I mean, it's that popular joke. What should have been a satire on politics in America became a chilling documentary throughout the run of this series, and they leaned into that. It got to the point in their later seasons where they needed to one up the current president of the United States because there was nothing off the table at that point. Yeah. And boy, did they put it all on the table. So, in my opinion, it is the gold standard of a satire and comedy in recent years, in at least the last 10 years for really anything. And I think the actors loved making the show. You could see it in the end product. They were having a blast doing it from beginning to end. You can see the love and care that went into this series. That's just me. Clearly, I love Veep. So,
well, Kevin does too. So, Kevin, I assume you're with Team Veep here.
I am. I love Deadwood too. I hear you, Karissa. I think Deadwood is also a fantastic show. I was one of the few people who genuinely loved Deadwood from the start, but I love to laugh. And I think Veep does such a good job. It is, I think, it's so fucking funny. I love that show. So I'm going with Veep.
When I think of Kevin, I think live, laugh, love. And so
Gary, your inner child needs to grow an outer man.
And I will just say this, Karissa, you did a great job stumping for Deadwood. It is a great show, and it is a very important HBO show. One thing we didn't touch on is, for a Western, the women in that show were incredible because they were treated the same way that the men were. And really, prior to that in Western storytelling, that didn't happen a lot. So it was groundbreaking in that respect as well. No, I mean, you don't have to sell me on Deadwood. It just has the misfortune of being up against Veep in round 2. So I believe we are moving Selena and Code up. Next up, it's 4 seed The Leftovers versus 1 seed The Sopranos. We're going to give it to The Sopranos, I believe. We talked about this. The Leftovers got a lot of discussion in part 1 of this episode. If you're like, oh my God, stop talking about that. Yeah, but like seriously, we really rapped philosophically on why it's a great show, but it's up against The Sopranos, and I just don't think that's an argument anyone here is going to win. Am I wrong? Bob, you even said, and you're not a Sopranos guy, you're like, no, The Sopranos should advance.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so then finally in round 2, 2 seed Curb Your Enthusiasm is gramping up 6 seed Euphoria's run. Kevin, explain why we shouldn't curb our enthusiasm for Larry David. I will put on spectacular eye makeup and preach for Euphoria. Kevin, do you want to go first or?
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, I talked about this in part 1 again. Plug Patreon. Become a Patreon supporter, please. We love you. But Larry David is, I think, one of the funniest people that is out there. Like, he is just really, and he puts it out there. And I think he knows that he's an asshole, and he loves it. Like, he owns his assholeness. Like, he knows that. I think one of my favorite, I mean, there are so many moments. There's the gay kid who makes Susie
Oh my God.
a pillow
first one
sham
that
that
comes
has
to
a
my mind.
swastika on it.
Yes.
There's the Spite coffee store because Mocha Joe makes a terrible scone. There's the Seinfeld reunion stuff, which is possibly the weaker stuff in Curb, but it still is funny. There's Larry getting blackmailed by the owner of a store to cast a young, unattractive woman in a Netflix show this season. There's, oh my God, I could just like go on and on forever about like, there's the pants tent, which is in the first episode where Larry is wearing corduroys and he gets a pants tent and he goes to the movies with his wife's friend, and she looks down and she thinks he has an erection, but he doesn't have an erection. It is the show about nothing that continues and perpetuates, but it just is about how Larry is very set in his ways and kind of owns that. And I really genuinely appreciate the humor he brings to TV and continues to have brought to TV for, again, 22 years. And then before that, we had Seinfeld. Like, so this man has been perpetually telling these like nonsensical jokes for a really long time, but they're still fresh and they're still great. And again, HBO is the only show or the only network where you could evolve Seinfeld into its true Pokemon form of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And it's just bananas and fun and wild, and you get to interact with like real life famous people like Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen and all these really old school comedians, but yet they understand who they are, what they're doing, and how they bring it to every ball. And I love it. I love Curb Your Enthusiasm a lot.
So I also love Curb, and it is remarkable that it's been on the air for literally 22 years. To me, this is an argument of the past and also present of HBO versus the future of HBO, because it's up against Euphoria. And Euphoria is, in case you didn't know, we just ended season 2. It is the second most watched HBO series ever behind Game of Thrones. That is remarkable because it is a show about teenagers doing drugs, having sex, and dealing with their mental health crises, but also a subplot about a closeted gay daddy who does some really fucked up shit. But the fact that it is getting that kind of viewership for what is ultimately like a teen drama, that's pretty massive. It's also not only successful, it's telling stories that are incredibly important to today's culture, not just teen culture, but for parents. I do not have kids. I will never have children. I watch Euphoria and I was just like, holy shit. I thought it was tough to be a teenager when I was one, but like today with social media, just the massive amounts of like real world anxiety, it is a slap in the face. And there are people who will tell you, well, it's not real. It's all highly exaggerated. I'm sure that's true. But I also think there are some very real elements to this show, even in the moments that it's kind of highlighted and made surreal. And I think they kind of toned that down a little bit in most of season 2. But then you have the play, which is like ridiculous, but also such an incredible storytelling moment that we were building like literally all season to this. And I was kind of a little disappointed with the first part of it, besides the holding out for a hero dance number, which is
amazing,
everything I wanted. But that second part where Cassie comes in, oh, that's drama, and it is so good. So it is a mess of a show. I do think that there's stuff that's going on behind the scenes that has dramatic impacts on storylines. Like the cat stuff is really complicated, apparently, and a lot of it has to do with behind the scenes stuff that we don't understand. But I think that cast is amazing. What Zendaya does on that show as a actor, as a producer, as a musician, she's incredible. And that's why I'm saying this is the future of HBO. Like this is a young person having an incredible amount of access to the power of this show and really directing where it's going. I find it remarkable. I truly do. And what a talented cast. So
like Billie Eilish.
Kind of, yes. It's the same thing. It's like, and I think those of us in Gen X are, and here's soapbox moment, are more confident in stepping back and being like, I'm not going to dismiss what you're doing, even though you're 20 years younger than me, because I think you're brilliant and I'm actually going to raise you up, and I want more. I want more from everybody in this cast. I think they're all really incredible. And I think that Levinson, who is the creator and the chief architect of it, is also doing amazing work. It's doing really important things for addiction, mental health in this country. And I am a convert. Karissa, where are you on this one?
Yeah, I'm with Euphoria for so many reasons. And one of the things, like, I don't usually do this, but for the last season, when the show ends, after the credits, they like talk about the episode if you let it keep going. And I've watched all of them, just the cast and the directors and the writers, just how they talk about how they conceive these storylines and how they approach them and how they wanted to respect these things. It's all just, it's so thoughtful. Everything about that show is so thoughtful, and it's so full of care, like they are so careful in all of it. So I love it for that. I also just am not a huge Larry David fan. In my friend circle in college, there was a guy who basically wanted to be George Costanza. And then when Curb started and he had direct access to the source, it got, worse. This is the guy who, one time when we were debating about movies, got really mad, yelled at me and said, "Well, you just think your taste is the best." And so isn't that sort of the point?
Exactly.
So we have a fundamental don't understand each other part. So I can't. I find that anxiety and the way that it is expressed to be exhausting, and it just reminds me too much of that guy. So. Yeah, I will be that elder millennial and hold space for these, what are they? Z? Y? Z?
I don't know.
Gen Z.
Gen Z. For these brilliant Gen Z people to
millennials are
do
Gen
their
Y.
things. I know. We millennials are 40.
Yep.
Welcome to the future. Kevin, you're sticking with Curb?
Yep.
Bob?
Yes, and can I just? I'm sorry, I'm not sticking with Curb. Actually, I'm gonna go with Euphoria.
But Bob. You switched your end vote too. I already saw that. I already looked at it.
I do want to throw out there though the episode where Larry gets a pubic hair stuck in his throat. It's really great.
Yes.
And the episode where he picks up the wrong Chinese food and then he goes back and gets the right Chinese food and then complains to the other person who he knew that got his food. He's like, "You took all the shrimp out of my shrimp stir fry. That's not in here. There's no shrimp. There's one shrimp in here."
I will argue we only have one comedy now if we do not move Curb forward.
Yes.
I'm just going to say that. And
but so also, what's HBO better at?
So
I don't know that they're better at one versus the other. I think they're good at both. And I think if we're only elevating dramatic series, and you all pointed this out, that we're moving things forward because they're dramas and not comedies, we're doing that right now again, potentially.
Fair. Bob, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say there's some parts of the more recent Curb Your Enthusiasm episodes and seasons that I find kind of beyond cringe a little bit. That it's just I can't believe we're hitting some of these things or doing some of these things where it's
Euphoria is cringeworthy.
Girl. I also think that Euphoria is at times a pretty good comedy. I watched that play. I watched Cassie stand in a mirror and say, "Do I look like I'm auditioning for Oklahoma?"
That was good.
Come on.
I also think Succession technically it could qualify as a comedy. It's won awards in both comedy and drama.
Recency bias. I just like to challenge you.
You're completely correct.
The thing is, I could push either of these forward, and I wouldn't be taking either of them to the end. So I guess it doesn't really make a difference.
I think and I think you're correct. In 5 years, if we look back on this, will we be like, man, we made the wrong decision there. Curb Your Enthusiasm should have increased over Euphoria. That's entirely possible, but I'm making my decision right now. And I did laugh at a lot of those Curb Your Enthusiasm throwbacks. I really did. What is the seed-wise? Curb is a 2 and Euphoria is a 6.
Kevin,
but the poll was taken before season 2 probably even aired.
That's true.
That is true. But I have to say, I think Kevin might have just switched my vote back.
Thank you.
Because recency bias and seeds. Like yeah, and so everything I just said, I defended you for you, and I love it, and I think it's great. But I'm switching my vote back. Karissa, you can hate me. I understand.
That's fine. I have tickets to Lexi's play, and you can't.
I can see this either way. I think there was some shakiness about season 2 that would make me worried about where it goes after this with Euphoria.
Sure, that's fair. Well, I think that is it for round 2. We're going to take a quick break to point and laugh at showtime. We will be right back after these messages. And we're back for round 3 of our best HBO original series debate. Limber up like you're going to bed with Mr. Cocky, because this is going to be a big one. Before we go into the Elite 8 matchups, I want to ask my panel, how can people find you on social media? Bob?
On Twitter and on Instagram, you can find me both of those places at DizNerdBob.
Thank you. Karissa?
I am on Twitter and Instagram as at Karissa Kloss.
Thank you. And Kevin?
I'm going to make it super confusing, like I always do. I am on Twitter at ETKevinsMind, and I am on Instagram on Kevin at Kevin_Dillon, DILLON_23. And that's where I post a lot of thirst traps. So
100% true.
There you go.
Yep. And you can find me at Eric Rezsnyak on Twitter and Instagram, or just message the at Great Pop Culture Debate account on Insta, or at culture_debate on Twitter. So with that being said, we're going to move into round 3 so we can get to the part where Lady True kills us all. First up, it's Game of Thrones versus Succession. We're going to go around the horn. I'm going to start with Bob. Game of Thrones or Succession?
Game of Thrones.
Kevin?
Succession.
Carissa?
Game of Thrones.
I'm also Game of Thrones here. Do you want to talk about Succession, Kevin? We haven't really talked about it that much.
Yeah, I don't like Game of Thrones. I'm going to be honest. I think it's a mediocre show. I think it's fine. I think Succession is like, you mentioned this a little bit ago. I think it's funny. I think it's intelligent. It like literally destroys the entire essentially like Rupert Murdoch of it all. And like, so for those who are not watching Succession, if you're not, I don't know what you're doing, but it essentially follows the Roy family, who essentially own what is the analogousness to
Waystar?
They own Waystar, and so it follows Logan, who is played by Brian Cox, who is the patriarch of the Roy family, and it follows his I always forget Alan Ruck. Poor Alan Ruck, who is actually really great in the show. But it follows typically like Kieran Culkin, Jeremy Strong, and then, God, why can't I remember her name? Oh my God, I'm blanking out. She plays Shiv.
Sarah Snook,
and Alan Ruck, and they play his children. And it just follows this like essential, like, it's almost Shakespearean. I think that's the thing I love the most about Succession.
Very King Lear.
Yeah,
it's very King Lear. It just is this essentially beautifully told, funny story about this family that essentially owns the media, owns a lot of the political environment of the common world that we live in. And I just really love watching these characters tell each other to fuck off. And I mean, it is just really fun to watch them play chess with one another. Always. You're always watching a meticulousness that exists. And this is fighting against Game of Thrones. And I think the Succession game of chess is more interesting than the Game of Thrones game of chess, because the Game of Thrones chess game was essentially blown apart in the end and didn't make any sense. Even though I didn't mind the series finale, it just started strong and petered out in a way that I didn't love. It was, again, fine. I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, worst series finale ever. No, not the case. It just wasn't as strong as I guess I would have liked it to be. But Eric, your point is you've made this point a couple times on this podcast that Succession season 3 started a little weaker. I think you essentially had to start in a weaker space to build to a weakening mind frame of the children in Succession, because Logan was overexerting himself and really kind of taking over that reign. And he doesn't want his children to succeed, which I think is one of the most fascinating stories ever. And I don't know. I just find Succession much more entertaining. It's funnier. It's more interesting. And I love watching all of those actors just play. It's like watching theater. It is so beautifully done.
Yeah, I get the theatrical comparison. To me, it's funny. You're like, the Game of Thrones, ultimately the game of chess is pointless and it's blown up. And that's exactly what I'm already feeling about Succession is you put it, he doesn't want to give over his power to any of them. He doesn't want any of them to succeed. So this whole little game that he puts them through, it's like
so fun.
But like, we've already done it. Like every season we go through this. It's this merry-go-round. And not for nothing.
Why do you watch Drag Race? It's the same thing with the
they all know what floor on the floor is, but they still go, and I think that's the whole point. They know exactly what it is and they're still playing the game regardless.
And
they're
like,
choosing it.
Exactly.
They are, but like, I guess at a certain point as a viewer, I'm just like, first of all, I'm just like, I deal with this with my family, but we have no money. So it's the stakes are lower, but like, it's the same thing. Like, who's on the shit list this week? But like, it's to a certain degree, I'm just like, we've already done this. Like, and how many times do we have to have, Shiv is out and she's all pissed off. But now she's back in because he throws her a bone. And yeah, that's interesting. The first like 2 or 3 times you do it to me, but now we're on like time 7. And I'm just like, you're all assholes, and I don't care what about any of you. Like, and I say this as someone who loved the first 2 seasons, but I noticed there was an enormous amount of anticipation leading up to season 3, and then gone. It just disappeared from the cultural zeitgeist.
No, that's not true. I mean, Eric, season 3, there was the Directors Guild nominations. I was mad about this, but it still happened. Succession was nominated for every single slot in the Directors Guild. Like, it is not gone. It won Best Ensemble at the SAG Awards. It is only capitalizing on its cultural cachet. It is only increasing its net worth. And I do agree that season 3 was slightly a little bit of a dip in the beginning, but where we ended up, my God, that divide is only setting us up for more success, more good things to come. And that's the difference between Succession and Game of Thrones for me. As Game of Thrones expanded its world, expanded its characters, it got less good. It started so strong. The first couple of seasons of Game of Thrones are excellent. I'll give you that. They are, yes.
I think season 1 is one of the weakest seasons.
I think it's fascinating because I think it sets up such really cool stuff. It starts small and expands in a really interesting way. And then it gives you a really great to fantastic to excellent season 2. And then season 3 is also excellent. And for me, after that, Game of Thrones kind of falls off a cliff a little bit.
Well, that's because at that point, like season 1 adapted book 1, season 2 adapted book 2, season 3 adapted book 3. And then after that, there were no more books to adapt because he hadn't finished writing them because he's a lazy shit. Sorry, I'm saying it. Let's call it out.
Do it.
That all being said, I don't want to belabor this point. I believe we are currently 3-1. Is anyone changing their vote to Succession?
No.
Karissa?
No.
Okay, so you made a very good argument, Kevin. We're going to have to stick to our guns on this one. Game of Thrones advances. Next, it's The Wire versus Watchmen. Bob, I'm assuming you're Team Watchmen.
I am Team Watchmen.
Kevin?
Wire.
Carissa?
Wire.
Okay, so here's where I'm going to come in with my Watchmen argument that I've been holding on to all episode. Understanding that it's not going to win, and I'm okay with that. So it is the entry on the list that is arguably the most dubious because it only had 1 season, but when it was initially announced, it was open. It was possibly going to be more. They just opted not to do more. The first and only season of Watchmen, when it was announced, I remember, complete confession, as a comic reader, I was like, oh my God, not again. Like, Watchmen is one of those things that comic readers have furiously masturbated over since the 1980s. It's Alan Moore's 1980s limited series, and it was one of the main reasons that comics shifted to this really dark, self-serious, navel-gazing place for literally decades. And it was cool and interesting at the time, but God, it inspired so much trash. And it's been so done. The Zack Snyder movie, the prequel comic books, the sequel comic books, I was just like, I don't need to see this property again. And then when I found out it was the people who did Lost doing this series, I was like, oh shit, this is going to be a mess. And I was dead wrong, because from the very first moments of episode 1, where it flashed back to the Tulsa massacres, this was a completely different property that took the best themes and characters from the original and instead used it to tell a completely new story in what was originally a very white, male-centered viewpoint on America, and shifted it completely to be like the minority and female experience. And it was revolutionary to me. I was absolutely dumbfounded week after week. I was challenged, I was shocked, I was surprised, and I was delighted by what I was seeing. Terrific acting from Regina King, Jeremy Irons, Gene Smart, Yahya Abdul-Mateen, Louis Gossett Jr. Every episode I thought was terrific. I was bummed out that it lasted only one season. They didn't bring it back because there were huge plot threads left dangling that totally should have been followed up on. But I'm so glad we got that one season, because it is excellent. I think it is, to this day, one of the best things that HBO has ever done. That being said, it's up against The Wire, and The Wire devotees are never going to let it advance. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Yes.
So, Bob, did you switch your vote to The Wire, or are you sticking with Watchmen?
No, I'm sticking with Watchmen. I think you really did a great job arguing for it. And you want to talk about a show that wants to say something? This is a show that wants to say something. And I get it. The Wire does too. But this, to me, and it was just so different and interesting from beginning to end, and you were continually guessing throughout it, and it was continually challenging you to think and flip things on its head. I just loved everything that it did, from beginning to end, without a doubt.
Yeah, and
I think you will get a second season eventually.
Do you?
Let's hope so.
I genuinely do. I think you're going to get when oh God, what is his name from Lost? You just said
Damon Lindelof.
I think when Damon Lindelof. So here's what his mindset is that he's like, I need to make sure that I have all my ducks in a row. I need to make sure that I have shit together. And I think that's why he did not do a season 2, because he did not want to disappoint people, because season 1 was so epically good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you will get a season 2 once you get an arc or a storyline that lines up, that allows him to feel like he's going to succeed.
Okay, listen, my body is ready whenever.
I'm willing to wait for it if it's going for it to be good, right? I'm willing to wait as long as we make sure that we do it right.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we will be advancing The Wire. Watchmen is going down. Next up, it's 6 Feet Under versus Veep. Incredibly different projects. Karissa, where are you on this?
I'm with 6 Feet Under here. I'm actually still working my way through Veep, which was one of the other things I started watching for this bracket. I'm almost all the way through season 5, so I'm pretty close to the end. But I have seen all of 6 Feet Under, which was must-watch TV for me as soon as the DVD sets came out. And I think that 6 Feet Under has one of the best series finales of all time ever. So. Yeah.
For sure. And also a very good season or series premiere. It's a strong pilot.
Yep.
Bob.
I'm with Veep.
Kevin.
I am also with Veep.
I'm also with Veep too. Sorry, Karissa. And
that's fine. I saw this happen.
I'm going to go back to my argument that 6 Feet Under is a great show. It just, I still believe it was the B squad to Sopranos. And Veep is unparalleled in terms of what it's trying to do. That's just my opinion. And again, you can tell me that I'm know nothing whore. Finally, in the Elite Eight, it's The Sopranos versus Curb Your Enthusiasm. Kevin, you go first.
Sopranos.
Bob.
Sopranos.
Karissa.
Sopranos.
And I will also be voting for Sopranos, even though. Bob, I hope I'm not blowing your spot here, but neither Bob or I are huge Sopranos fans. But if you're talking about the quintessential HBO experience, you can't not talk about The Sopranos. So,
and I will also point out that we let Sex and the City go down, although that's part of the quintessential HBO experience in the comedy side. But
I agree with you.
Just saying, I was willing to
Not
give
according
up
to the voters.
That is part 2. That was a 4 seed. So final 4 of Game of Thrones versus The Wire, Veep versus The Sopranos. Interesting. Honestly, didn't see it coming down to this, but let's start with Game of Thrones versus The Wire. I'm going to start with Bob.
I'm going to go with the Game of Thrones.
Kevin, I'm assuming you're The Wire.
I am The Wire.
Carissa?
I'm The Wire.
And I'm going with Game of Thrones, which means it is a tie here. I think we've heard a lot of arguments on The Wire.
I have a few more if you want.
I would love for you to do this. Yes, give it to me.
Okay, so all right, we're hitting it. If we want to talk about icons, if I tell you some character names, if I say Omar Little, you know who I'm talking about. If I say Bubbles, you know who this is. I'll give you 5 words. Idris Elba as Stringer Bell. Okay, like these are iconic these are career-making performances for a lot of these actors. So the show was mostly overlooked awards wise while it was airing, but seasons 4 and 5 were recognized by writers guilds and directors guilds because they recognized what the show was doing and how ahead of the time it was. If you are in a university, chances are this will be some of your course material. There are classes on The Wire at several universities. The Wire is a text in Harvard's class on urban inequality. You'll also encounter it in law classes, film classes, sociology classes, and as an example of literary fiction.
Is that all?
Well, I mean, I have some more, but I can pause.
Everything you're saying, but your first argument, Bubbles, I have no idea who that is. Omar, I know who Omar is just because everybody talks about Omar. But
when Michael K. Williams died last year, everyone was talking about. Yeah,
but you want to talk about if I say something? Do you know what Khaleesi is? Do you know what Valar Morghulis is?
Character who ended bad.
Cersei, Joffrey,
the Shame Nun. Like even like tiny little incidental characters are like renowned. Like I don't think you can make the argument that The Wire has more cultural awareness than Game of Thrones. I mean, Game of Thrones is fucking everywhere. Not so much now. We have to acknowledge the last season hurt its ultimate kind of cultural relevancy. I don't think there's any debate about that. And I'm an apologist for the last season. It was rushed as hell, but I do think that the wrap up was not as bad as everyone says it was. But like, you cannot make the argument
poorly written women versus an authentically created story around a city and people that fully formed. I'm sorry.
Did you have watch parties for The Wire? Did you have all of your friends over to watch them?
It wasn't that kind of a show.
It wasn't that kind of a show.
You're very correct. The Wire did a lot of things. The one thing it didn't do was get a huge audience like Game of Thrones.
Right.
But it's number 2. So you're arguing that a show that didn't have a lot of people watching it live is not as good as just because a show didn't have people watching it when it aired doesn't mean it was bad. Like that's the argument that you're making right now.
No. That is not the argument I'm making.
Bob was saying that just because it didn't have watch parties or whatnot doesn't mean it's not a good show.
Eric said watch parties.
Yeah, I'm not saying. I don't even think Bob's saying that either. I'm not saying it's not a good show, but I'm saying you can't say it's number 2. Game of Thrones is number 1. I think they're both very good shows. I think you can make the argument that the ending of Game of Thrones was super rushed. The people make the argument that the female characters are not very well written, which I don't think is entirely true. If I'm being honest, I think
the well-written female characters
Arya's
outside of Cersei and Arya. Name the well-written characters.
I'm sorry. What was the first part of that?
I said name the well-written female characters outside of Cersei and Arya that had long arcs.
Lady Tyrell,
Brienne.
Kind of. I'll give Brienne to you. I will not give Lady Tyrell to you.
Marjorie?
Yeah, I would only say
Marjorie.
Brienne.
Marjorie did not have a good arc. She died unceremoniously.
The Shame Nun?
I think Marjorie has a great arc. Are you kidding me? Like, she's on the cusp of everything, and it's ripped away
this
from her.
sci-fi bullshit that it just because you think it's on HBO. I'm sorry, it's not good. It's not. I'm not going to agree with you. So you've not won.
And you don't have to agree with me because guess what? I don't need your votes. It's the ultimate number 1 seed. We have 2 votes. You have 2 votes. I win, motherfucker. That's the Game of Thrones. So
That's fine. You can have this round.
You're gonna no, they have the whole thing because Bob switched.
And here's the other thing I'm going to say is I think this is a real stretch, but follow me here. Back on OG Original Idol, whenever the people came in to do the auditions, they were always like, who do you listen to? Oh my God, I love Donny Hathaway. And I'm like, fucking bullshit. That is the same thing that when I was running in journalism, I would have interns come in and say, what do you read? Oh, I read The New Yorker. It's the answer everybody gives because they know that's the answer they're supposed to give. So The Wire coming in as a 2 seed on this is the answer everybody gave because they knew they were supposed to give it. But it doesn't match up to the actual cultural relevancy of the show. I'm sorry. You can argue all the time that you want, like, oh, it did all of these incredible things. But if you go out and poll 20 people on the street, maybe 3 of them have watched The Wire. It's the truth. I'm sorry.
Then why did it get number 2? But anyways,
because people were telling you what they wanted. It's poll bias.
I've been pushing Sopranos ahead because it's what I've known I've needed to do.
Same. And I don't like it, but I pushed it to the final 4 because I know I'm supposed to.
Taste is irrelevant, but continue. Let's move on.
Taste is not irrelevant in a pop culture debate. It's literally the whole fucking point. Like what Karissa said about her friend in college. Isn't that the point of having an opinion on something?
Let's keep going.
Ex-friend.
So with that being said, with that very heated debate along Dracarys, Game of Thrones is continuing to the final 2 over The Wire. And next it's Veep versus The Sopranos. I'm very curious where you're coming down, Kevin, here, because I'm a huge fan of both shows.
I actually picked Veep.
Interesting. Karissa?
I have a million things to say about The Sopranos, which is my ultimate pick.
Bob?
I'm choosing Veep.
I am also going to give it to The Sopranos because ultimately, even though I don't like it personally, I understand from a cultural and HBO perspective, it is bonkers for it to not be in the final 2 versus Veep. And I can respect its quality, even though I don't like it, in the same way I respect The Wire's quality, even though it's not for me. And I hope that's not come across as like Eric hates The Wire. I don't hate The Wire. I found it boring, and I find The Sopranos just not for me. You said you're not an Italian-American. I'm an Italian-American versus sexual infusion, but I still don't like The Sopranos. So
I actually am going to switch my vote to The Sopranos, actually, as well.
Okay, but does anybody want to say, like, I think we've made strong arguments for Veep, right?
Yes.
Like, we acknowledge it's an amazing show. I think it belongs in the final 4. I don't think it belongs in the final 2.
I agree with you.
I just want to look at my children 20 years from now, and when they say, where were you on this day and what did you pick? I picked Veep.
And you can do that with a sparkle in your eye, Bob. Okay.
I know The Sopranos is going forward, and I'm fine with it.
Game of Thrones versus Soprano, the final 2, I think it's the most obvious final 2. That's not why I put them both in there. I'm going to go around the horn here. Karissa.
I'm with The Sopranos.
Bob.
I'm with the Game of Thrones.
It's not the Game of Thrones. It's Game of Thrones, girl.
Okay.
Kevin.
Sopranos, easily.
So if we're going by seeds, technically Game of Thrones is the ultimate number 1 seed.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that Game of Thrones is the show that I enjoy more, and I would rewatch it. I've read all the books. I've even read the supplementary materials, for fuck's sake. But is it the defining HBO show? Is it the best HBO show?
Can I say something and retract my anger that I exacted on all of you in a minute? I think the 2 of them are the defining HBO shows.
I agree with that.
I really do. And I'm going to be nice, and I'm sorry if I came in a little hot against both of you, and I apologize. But I think the 2 of them are the defining HBO shows. You're 100% right.
You do not need to apologize. I'm the one who came in hot there.
But I don't always like to be I don't want to diabetes this. I don't want to capital. I do think I think these are the defining HBO shows. They really are.
I do too. And I think Game of Thrones is the defining second golden age of HBO, and Sopranos is the first golden age of HBO.
Yep.
I think what Sopranos has going for it that Game of Thrones does not is that it was, again, acknowledging it is not my favorite and it's not a show for me. It was consistently regarded as excellent television from tip to tail. It did not have, even if there were episodes that people didn't love, season-wise, it is still generally regarded as consistently very good. And Game of Thrones does not have that. Game of Thrones.
What's funny?
What's funny?
Both of them had finales that people hated.
It's true, but now I feel like people have really come around on the Sopranos finale.
Correct.
I think people have actually embraced it. Will we have that in 10 years from Game of Thrones? I don't think we will.
I don't think so either.
Because I think the issue, and you talked about it a little bit, Kevin, was it wasn't just that final episode, right? It was that whole final season that was so rushed and so much buildup was just thrown into a meat grinder that there was nothing you could do. Whereas with Sopranos, it was like the last 5 minutes that people didn't like, right?
Yeah, the fade to black.
Right.
The fade to, yeah.
So I think that is why Sopranos has the leg up for me here, but I'm curious to hear, Karissa, you haven't really spoken on The Sopranos yet, and you love this show, so take it away.
I do love this show. It was the beginning of solidifying HBO as premium television, and also Tony as an anti-hero. So maybe Game of Thrones has opened doors for other shows, but without The Sopranos was kind of, Tony was the prototype for us getting Walter White and also Don Draper. Like the creators of these characters have spoken openly about being inspired by this show and this character. So effects on, other quality television are right there. Putting Tony in therapy is brilliant because it gives us insight into his inner thoughts, and that's what tips this genre on its head, because it is also like a gangster show, right? But it is not. It is a family drama. It is a weird workplace drama because he goes to the office, And then there's like the teenagers, and Meadow is like this, becoming woker teenager whose parents, pay for her to go to Columbia, but also like, look at how they make their money, So there's this really interesting push-pull of wanting to root for these people that are morally reprehensible, and the show reminds you of this. It doesn't let you forget that, but you still it plays in this really interesting dynamic way with its audience. I think it's top-notch television. I rewatched it the winter of 2020, 2021. It was one of my favorite things. I paused before going into season 6 because I did not want it to end again. So
I will add, I think Sopranos has spawned a genre of anti-hero, male and female, that Game of Thrones has not necessarily. Game of Thrones has spawned the evolution of fantasy, not in the best way for me. Like Sopranos gives you Mad Men, which was also written by Matthew Weiner, who was a writer on The Sopranos. It also spawned Breaking Bad. It spawns Ozark. It spawns like all of this evolution of television, whereas Game of Thrones is almost anomalous in the same way like Return of the King is anomalous, like, or the Lord of the Rings films are anomalous. Like they're these like singularly beautiful shows that do very good insularly, whereas The Sopranos is evolutionary in a different way. And I think that's why I'm coming down to Sopranos.
I will push back in that I do think that Game of Thrones did inspire the fantasy genre, and there have been some very good entries already. I think Wheel of Time, the first season didn't knock it out of the park, but there's some really good stuff in there. It would not have happened before Game of Thrones. We have the new Lord of the Rings TV series coming to Amazon. The Witcher, arguably, is also a beneficiary of this. And those are shows that hold their own. Are they as...
And there's that prequel coming, right? To HBO,
Correct.
The Dragon.
There's the House of the Dragons that's coming, yeah. And we don't know from those yet if they're going to be successful. But I do think that it did bring an entire new genre into realization on TV. It also encouraged TV networks to take a gamble on something, because this was not a sure thing. It was a very risky move to do Game of Thrones. It was incredibly expensive. And the amount of money that they were putting into each episode was basically like a feature film for every final episode of season 8, that is HBO, right? It is that audacity to say, we're going to put down this kind of money and take a huge gamble. And more often than not, it does pay off for them. The Sopranos is a little bit of a safer bet, I think. And I do give points for ambition almost any time we're in one of these debates. The other thing I will argue, and then I'm going to cede it to Bob, and I'm let me be very clear here. I'm completely fine with The Sopranos winning, and I do think it's probably the right choice. But is it such a great thing that The Sopranos then inspired all of these other shows that look into crime in America and make us feel empathetic towards hardened criminals? I'm not sure that is. There's a big part of me, and this is why I'm not a huge fan of mafia movies, etc., is why are we glorifying this? I understand why it's interesting, but
I think that's a simplistic view of it, though.
Yeah, because we're not glorifying it. I don't think
they glorify it. I don't think so. I don't feel good. I don't feel better. I don't feel better for Tony Soprano. I don't feel better for Walter White. I feel bad for the people around them who are pulled into their orbit because of the way that they conduct their lives, the way that they live their lives. I think that's the whole point. It's the same thing with like Killing Eve and Villanelle, and like they're pulling these people into their world. We're not necessarily feeling bad for them. We're finding them interesting because there is a complexity to the criminal mind, of course, but I don't feel bad for them. And I think that's the same thing. And Bob just said this week with The Dropout and Elizabeth Holmes. I don't feel bad for Elizabeth Holmes. I think it's an interesting examination of who she is as a human, but like, we're getting to tell complex stories about complex people, but I don't feel bad for them. I'm engaged in a space where I'm able to view them. So that's I'll throw that back and
that's fine. And I think the showrunners agree with you, Kevin. Their intention is not to make us necessarily root for these people, but you know as well as I do, there are a lot of people out there that idolize Tony Soprano, that idolize Walter White. The man has fucking t-shirts that are still being sold as Heidenberg. Like, whether that's the intention or not, there is a significant number of the population that's just like, yeah, man, that's who I want to be. That was a gangster. And it's like, I think you're kind of missing the point. But, ultimately at the end of the day, is that something that should determine whether or not it's a successful show? I guess not. Bob, what are your thoughts on this?
I want to start by saying that I'm troubled by the implication from Karissa that Game of Thrones is not a workplace drama. So
I guess maybe now in our work from home where you can where you're a nomad and you still have a workplace, it works.
I too pushed a child off a ledge.
I think I'm going out on a limb, and I know that I'm probably going to lose, and I'm probably going out on a limb saying this because I don't have any data to back this up, but I don't think I could deny the shared experience of Game of Thrones. I know that Sopranos had that same shared experience to a certain degree, but this was almost on another level from my recollection of the two different eras of these series. There was really something that kept us coming back week after week because we needed to know who was going to sit on the throne in the end. I know it kind of fumbled a little bit in the end, although I love Game of Thrones from beginning to end. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh God, this was terrible. I get it that it was rushed and you can see that, but I still think it's very good. And I think a lot of the folks who rag on the last season of Game of Thrones are very similar to those Star Wars fans who hate Star Wars. Because there's nothing cooler than to hate Star Wars when you actually love Star Wars. And people are going to stop making it for you if you keep doing that. Just FYI, there's my public service announcement. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's so true.
Can I give you an insight into ratings as we do this? So the average rating for Game of Thrones in its last season was 12 million viewers. It's the same for The Sopranos. So they have
interesting.
They have the literal same viewership.
That is fascinating.
The thing is like, and think about like timing of like access to HBO. HBO has a higher level of access in the modern era than it did back in the day. And
so here's a fun fact. Sopranos was kind of the beginning. It first came to DVD at the beginning of the rise of Netflix. So it was the first series that people who didn't pay for premium television could marathon. You would get your 2 or 3 discs and you'd watch a whole season in a weekend, and then you'd move on to the next. And so that was my experience with The Sopranos initially. That was how I started watching it, and then watching the seasons when they came out. And then I was an HBO subscriber, and so watched the final season when it happened live. So I think it was kind of that experience for a lot of people, but being able to maybe marathon the episodes changed maybe some of the fan base and also accessibility.
And if you were old enough, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, if you're old enough to remember getting DVDs through Netflix, please schedule your colonoscopy. Bob, you've been trying to say something.
No, and I think, and I can't speak to, I never watched all of or finished The Sopranos for sure. Like, I'm very limited in my total Sopranos knowledge because of this, and I know it was a very different time of the internet then than it was now with Game of Thrones, right? But I just feel like there was that ongoing conversation of people coming together and having to talk about, like, oh, this could happen, and what's this theory, and what's my fan theory about what's going to happen. I guess I don't know the full story of Sopranos to know if those were the same sort of conversations.
It totally had that. It was who's going to get whacked next. Yep. It was the start of like Television Without Pity fan group stuff, speculation.
They were also like decoding Tony's dream sequences and like, what does this mean? What is it hinting at? Like that was happening. But to your point, Bob, I think there was more of that going on with Game of Thrones, but is it because the internet had boomed in that way? Kevin, I feel like you were trying to get something in there.
Oh, I was also going to say, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Wikipedia right now to just like have my numbers. So at its highest, The Sopranos had almost 14 million viewers. Game of Thrones actually never came close to touching that. And so I will say that if we're talking viewership, it's just a different time. Like, that's the thing. We're comparing time. And like, The Sopranos and Game of Thrones came out in different time frames when viewership is a different thing. And they're both great. And to be honest with you, remember, Eric, we did this in the Emmys, and I don't know how you feel about this, but like, both are great. And I'd be comfortable being like, these are the 2 best shows that HBO has ever done. I don't know. I'm fine with doing that. I like that answer. I mean, I like playing Kofi Annan and being like, these 2 shows are both great, and they're both great for different reasons. And so like, you know, like, why not like Ingrid Bergman when Barbara Streisand won the Oscar? It's a tie. Katharine Hepburn in The Lion in Winter and Barbara Streisand in Funny Girl.
Well, I got it.
Well, I got it.
Nice try. I'm not going to put the peanut butter and the chocolate together. The throne belongs to one person, not. We've only done 2 ties in the history of the Great Pop Culture Debate, and this is not going to be our third. But that being said,
stop delaying the inevitable.
I do think it. I think it is The Sopranos for me, and that, Kevin, it's for you.
It is for me.
And Karissa.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so regardless of my personal feelings on the show, and Bob, I hope you're not too upset.
No, I knew this would happen.
He saw it coming, like one of the dreams that he'll discuss with Dr. Melfi.
I faded to black on this side.
Exactly.
He went the way of the ducks.
Yes. And there you have it. Our pick for the best HBO original series is The Sopranos. Do you agree? Do you think we need to visit the Pine Barrens? Tell us how you really feel by leaving a comment on this episode at greatpopculturedebate.com, or find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. While you're there, make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so that you can hear about what new debates are coming soon, vote in open polls, and even decide which topics we tackle next. I want to say thank you to my panel. I will never cancel my subscription to you. And thank you for listening. If you loved what you heard, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can find even more exclusive content and you get episodes a whole day early. We hope you have a good one. And remember, everybody, you're entitled to your wrong opinions, especially us this episode.